primary goal is to get patients well. So everything we're going to do in this model has to be for the benefit of the patient. Rule number one. Rule number two is there's some pitfalls in healthcare. If you do something that's not compliant, you get in trouble. So rule number two was we got to be compliant.
This podcast is brought to you by Advanced Medical Integration. AMI is a company that is challenging the status quo of healthcare. They believe that the power of healing lies within the individual. They help enable this process by empowering healthcare providers to offer services that promote the body's ability to heal itself. The AMI model offers providers a more solid foundation to operate from. The scope of services as a medical office can provide, coupled with the strong demand by the public for a wide array of holistic services, means that their business will have the viability to thrive. Practitioners can now serve the 90% of their community that does not typically utilize chiropractic services. Our model can be easily adapted to the newest services and procedures. AMI prides itself in innovating healthcare service delivery. One of the greatest appeals to patients is that it's a complete clinical team's approach to their care. This ensures that they are getting the very best treatment possible to resolve their condition and ensures positive outcomes. Our proven systems over at AMI helps establish a multifaceted physical medicine practice, and we provide a clear path to making positive changes by building a principled, multidisciplinary team under one roof to provide the best possible care for patients. Welcome back to the Prospecting Show. Today we have Dr. Mike Carberry on it. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thank you. So I appreciate you taking some time. Before we kind of dive into all the details, why don't you tell the listeners and the viewers in this case a little bit more about your story, your background, where you came from, and how you got to where you are right now?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. I never grew up thinking I was going to be in the position I'm in right now. I grew up with an interest in business. When I went to college for undergrad school, I went and got a degree in marketing. I got a BS in marketing. I went to Stockton State College, which is now Stockton University in New Jersey. Graduated in 1983. I got a job in sales working with a Fortune 500 company Dun & Bradstreet. I worked for a division of theirs at the time, Reuben Donnelly, selling advertising. And while I was doing that, I started dating a girl who was a physical therapist. And she specialized in traumatic brain injury and stroke rehabilitation. I became kind of fascinated with what she did, but at the same time, I had a neck injury. And the neck injury was a pretty severe one. I jumped off a platform onto the beach and felt like I got struck by lightning. I temporarily went paralyzed. Didn't know what a stinger was, but that's apparently what I had. The doctor in the emergency room didn't know what a stinger was either. But all I knew, I was paralyzed for about a minute. Then when it wore off, I was in a lot of pain down my arm and up the side of my head. So I started taking medication for it. It was the only time in my life I couldn't work because the medication was so strong. After doing that for about 3 weeks, I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. And against everybody's advice in my life, I went to a chiropractor. And the chiropractor fixed me. So, and not only did he fix me, I was having headaches before that injury that went away when I started going to the chiropractor. And I realized there was something wrong with my neck before I jumped off that platform. I was very passionate about going back to school to become a chiropractor. And I did. I graduated in 1991. I opened my first practice in 1992. I grew very quickly. By 1994, I was doing 425 visits a week. That's when my wife insisted I hire an associate. So I did. And then I hired another one in 95, 96. And we were doing 700 visits a week. At that time, I had the dream practice. I was making a lot of money. We saw a lot of patients. We helped a lot of people. But there were some things that bugged me. Sometimes patients would come back to me a year later and say, hey, you helped out a lot, but that thing came back. Not a lot of them, but enough of them to make me go, how did I know they were fixed? And I realized I didn't have a really good objective way of doing that. So I started looking at what other things could I do and kept coming up rehab. So I started studying the work of a guy named Rene Callier. He was an MD and he was a physiatrist. And what his work that I was reading, he said, when somebody injures their spine, even if it's the low back, the first thing they do is they shift their head forward. And he called that forward head carriage. So I took that data that I learned and I looked at my patient base, which was huge, and they all had it. And I thought, he must be right. Then my wife came upon work of another physiatrist named Vladimir Janda, who was from Czechoslovakia. And he said, Callier was correct. You do shift your head forward. And when you do, you start using different muscles to hold your body up. And he called it upper cross and lower cross syndrome. Well, when I read this and my wife read this, we went, all right, let's test people for it. I remember doing a pilot in our office, and everybody we tested had upper cross and or lower cross syndrome. So we thought, this is perfect. I'm married to a PT. We could work together. That could change everything. And we found out that the state of Pennsylvania did not allow a physical therapist to work off the referral of a chiropractor. Now, in a lot of states they do, but Pennsylvania didn't. So somebody suggested, why don't you bring a medical doctor into the fold? And I was very leery of that. I was put on medication. I didn't want to have other people put on medication. I didn't want to do that. But I was willing to look at it. And we put an ad out, and we had an overwhelming response of medical doctors applying for a job to work with a high-volume chiropractor, which is what our ad said. And I was very surprised at that. So what happened was, when I started interviewing, I started hearing these stories of medical doctors getting a little discouraged with medication and the amount of medication in healthcare. And I didn't know that was going on. So we realized we were onto something, and we started creating systems, and the practice developed. The medical practice, we realize now we had to create a medical practice that had chiropractic as opposed to a chiropractic office that had medical, because only 10% of the population go to a chiropractor, and we wanted to get the 90% of the population. So over the years, we figured out how to do that. I was asked about 7 years ago by a group to start a consulting company to teach our model. Now, we had worked on, there's a business side to this and there's a clinical side to it, and we had to sort that out. So what we did was he said, our primary goal is to get patients well. So everything we're going to do in this model has to be for the benefit of the patient. Rule number one. Rule number two is there's some pitfalls in healthcare. If you do something that's not compliant, you get in trouble. So rule number two was we got to be compliant. And then rule number three was if we don't make a profit, we're going to go broke. We won't be able to help anybody. So it's got to be profitable. So we made it very specific to keep it in that priority. Patient first, compliance second, profits third. And that has done us really well over the years. And we set our consulting company up the same way. We grew extremely fast. The last 2 years, 2018, 2019, AMI, Advanced Medical Integration, our consulting company, was on the Inc. 5000 list as one of the fastest growing companies in the United States out of 28 million companies. So we're very fortunate to be in that position, to have that growth and disseminating this model out to doctors of all disciplines. So that's how we got here.
And if you had to pick one thing in your mind that has separated your guys' consulting company from other models that exist out there, what do you think that one thing is?
I would say, that's a great question, but I would say it's those three rules. It's putting the profits behind the patient outcome and behind the compliance. We want to make sure that we get patients well. So everything we do, like we reverse engineer it. We look at our clients and say, all right, if they're a chiropractor, which most of them are, and they want to put this model in place, what would be the best way for the patients to hear about it? Well, there are more, 9 out of 10 people go to a medical doctor, but 1 out of 10 people go to a chiropractor. So what we do is we market to the 90%, and putting the patient first is very important for that. So I would say that's most important.
Yeah. And when you look at other practices that have an integrative model, either a single practice that has kind of designed it on their own, they've got a nurse practitioner or a medical doctor together with a chiropractor, where do you see those practices having difficulties that you guys have solved with the systems that you've put in place? Like, what makes you guys different than those independent kind of groups?
Well, there's other good products out there. I want to be clear about that. But one of the things that we see people having trouble with is wrestling with the idea of a chiropractor is usually an entrepreneur mindset. So I'm going to back up a little bit because it's a complex answer to a complex question. There's similarities and differences between the medical profession and the chiropractic profession. And the similarities I found are that 80% of all those professions, the doctors wanted to get into that business to help people. But, and the 20% in it for the money, I usually try to stay away from the 20%. But the differences are that chiropractors are very entrepreneurial. Medical doctors tend to be very academic. So it's just their mindset. It's harder to get into medical school. And chiropractors, when they're in school, they realize they're not going to get sent a bunch of patients by the hospital. So they realize they're going to have to go out and get their patients. what I see, there's exceptions to the rule, but I see medical doctors a lot of times are saying, I don't know how to get new patients. And I don't want to run a business. I just want to practice and treat people to help them get well. Whereas chiropractors, and there's exceptions to this rule as well, but a lot of them are very entrepreneurial. They're willing to take a calculated risk. And we're not in a risky business where we take calculated risks, because it's that mindset that actually can change an industry. So it's the two together that make it work. One of the things that I see the chiropractors who are running these practices wrestling with is they're used to it being all centered on them, whereas this now is a medical team. And they can't tell the medical practitioner what to do. They have to allow the medical practitioner to make decisions for the best good of that patient. So the way we handle that is we teach our clients, look, you get agreements with these medical practitioners ahead of time, just like a hospital does. A hospital has the right to say, we're not going to do heart transplants in this hospital. But they can't tell a medical doctor, don't treat that patient that needs a heart transplant that way, treat them this way. So if you get agreements on the services that you're going to do in your office, and then you have systems in place for that treatment, you have to let those medical practitioners make that decision and determine which of those systems is best for that patient. You can't dictate to them.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point in the fact that a lot of what you're doing is coming down to a system, right? It's not necessarily who's right and who's wrong about the way that something's done. It's that you have a system in place to say, in this scenario, we do X, and in this other scenario, we do Y. And these are the parameters that we're going to live in as a practice to make sure that, again, your rule number one, patient is taken care of first, right? And so if you set that bar up this high, I think it's almost impossible to fail, right? Because you have the principles in place to be able to say, this is what's important to us. And then below that, we will figure out all the other pieces.
Right. Well, it's a good point you make. What makes it difficult in healthcare, if we were making hot dogs, you could say, well, here's a system for making a hot dog and always make it this way. But we're not. We're treating patients and they never present the same way. So that clinician, you have to say, look, here's the different tools we have at our disposal. And when a patient comes in, you have to decide what they have versus what we have. Sometimes it might mean, you know what, you need to go get surgery. We don't do that here. But most of the times we have options where we can help people avoid surgery. But I can't dictate to the nurse practitioner or to the MD, I want you to do it this way for this patient. I have to trust their judgment. I have to provide systems for them, make sure they understand the systems, give them the training and invest in them so they can make those decisions. But they have to make the decision, not me. That's the hardest part of the whole.
Yeah. And if you look at the model that you guys have where you're trying to look at a practice and say, how can we bring the best of both worlds together? What do you think it's going to take for most chiropractors to realize that what they have is great in one box, but for them to kind of transition and treat the patient more by having a medically integrated practice, they have to do that next step? How do you talk to people about taking that next step when they've done the same thing for, let's say, 5 years or 10 years, and they're just used to that over and over and over again?
Or 20 years or 30 years. Right. We have guys too. It's kind of like telling a fish, the world is bigger than your fish tank. If you've always lived in a box and you don't know what's outside the box, sometimes going outside that box is scary. So the biggest thing that the owner, and not all of our owners are chiropractors. We have some owners that are medical doctors and acupuncturists and physical therapists and nurse practitioners. So you have to be able to look outside of what you're used to and realize that things are different in a different arena. For example, a lot of chiropractors, when I talk to them, they say, well, patients won't spend that much money on getting treated in a practice. And I have to point out to them, well, no, in a chiropractic practice, there's a difference how much they'll spend in a medical practice. And whether that's fair or not fair, I'm not going to judge that. I just say that's the way it is. I've noticed that over and over in every practice I ever started. So they have to think a little bit bigger than what they're used to because it's a different environment, which is what makes it exciting to me. It makes being exciting.
That's exactly it. And I think the thing that you're talking about is a price cost value mismatch, right? Is that somebody goes into a practice and says, well, chiropractors do X service, they adjust the spine. And in the mind of the people, that's probably what they associate chiropractic with, low back pain or neck pain for the most part, even though we both know that they do a lot more than that. That's really the focus. So that value on the stack of all the things that could be done is kind of in the middle and maybe low, so to speak, right? And so people are used to paying that price because they feel the value is worth X, and so they're willing to pay Y price. But what you're talking about, which takes it a step further, is you're creating a greater value stack for the patient by having other services and having two minds together. So my question there is, how do you think that a chiropractor can take their practice and integrate it, but then mentally get around the idea that their service is worth more than what they think?
You make a very valid point. There's a quote a friend of mine did, Brandon Dawson, and he says, price is only an issue in the absence of value. So what we do is we focus on what are we actually helping the patient do. I'll give you an example. Not many chiropractors have people coming into them that are facing knee replacement and want an alternative. But in a medical practice, we do all the time. There's a lot of people facing that issue. The knee replacement surgery is anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000, depending on who you talk to. But I just talked to somebody this weekend, said theirs was $55,000. And there's complications with that. So if a patient's paying $55,000 or their insurance is paying $55,000, they have a copayment. That copayment might be $10,000. So to pay a $5,000 copayment, an out-of-pocket expense to a medical or a chiropractic practice or a medical practice that is owned by a chiropractor could seem very out of reach for a chiropractor. But for the patient and for the medical world, they're like, no, that's just the way it is. Right. You know, we have offer payment options. So it's the perception. Sometimes the one who doesn't think it's worth it the most is the chiropractor, not the patient.
Well, and that kind of goes back to opportunity cost for the patient, right? You could look at it and say, yeah, the patient's got to invest $5,000 to get the knee replacement, but what is the cost of them not getting the other therapies that they could have gotten, right? In this integrated practice, like maybe they only spend $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000. It doesn't really matter what the price is, but the outcome could be achieved maybe with less money, less time, and less effort if they had all of the options on the table. And I think that's what you guys are providing. Is that not correct?
Yeah, well, if you look at it, let's just break down that example we were using, the knee patient. If you got a knee replacement, that's addressing the knee. It's not addressing what caused that knee to break down faster than the other one. If you did something like regenerative medicine, it's possible that knee could repair, just like the knee replacement. But that's not addressing what caused it. What caused it is usually the tracking. So I tell patients, whether you're doing a knee replacement, whether you're doing regenerative medicine, that's not going to fix the problem. What's going to fix the problem is correcting the alignment. The example would be just like fixing tires on a car that needs a front end alignment. If you don't do the alignment, the tires are going to wear down again. Right. So it's looking at the bigger picture and say, what actually caused the problem and what's going to be responsible to fix that? And then, having medical tools at our disposal. Let's say when people have alignment issues with their pelvis that causes a change to the tracking of the knees, they're going to have problems with trigger point and painful muscles in their back along with the knees. Having a medical person like a doctor or a nurse practitioner who could do trigger point injections and possibly do regenerative medicine injections while you're doing rehab, while you're doing chiropractic to correct the alignment, all that combined is what's going to fix that patient.
And it's kind of interesting because you talk a lot about the belief system or the individual, the way that they're thinking about solving their problem, right? Maybe the patient thinks, I got a knee problem, so I need to go to the medical doctor because I'm probably going to need a knee replacement. And then you kind of went back and you said, like, well, how old's the other knee, right? It's kind of the concept of like, it's a tracking thing, right? Oh, my knee needs to be replaced because it's old. Yeah, well, how old's the other knee? It's the same, right? It really is. So the mentality of the patient and the mentality of the physician, whether that's the chiropractor, nurse practitioner, or medical doctor, is really what drives, I think, the business opportunity here, because not only are you helping patients, but you're also creating more opportunity for those patients that they otherwise would not have.
Right. The education we have to do with the patients a lot of time is shifting their viewpoint away from pain and symptoms towards function. Once a patient understands if function is correct, the symptoms will go away and stay away. If you ask a patient, do you want to take a drug for the rest of your life to keep a symptom at bay? Most of them will say no, but they do it anyway because they don't know what else to do. So the focus here is let's educate the patient. If we correct its function so that it doesn't come back, now you have pain-free and you don't need to keep medicating it. Well, most of them are in favor of that. So it's educating the doctor, educating the staff, educating the patient, and then the owner changing their viewpoint of this is a bigger game than just, adjusting patients, which is important, but not everything.
Right. And with your experience being, in the United States and seeing the healthcare system there that's very driven by a specific model, do you find that the U.S. is behind other countries in the way that they integrate practices? Or are they above now because you've created this system? Where do they fall compared to other health systems?
Well, I haven't lived in other countries, but I talk to a lot of people from other countries. there's biases here that are not in other places. There's biases in other places that are not here. But I will say that our system is pretty broken. That's why I wrote this book, The Death of American Healthcare. I wrote this last year. And what we did was I looked at a lot of research I did over the years for radio shows. I had a regular radio show for years. And a lot of the experience I had in interacting with people from the pharmaceutical industry and from the medical industry. And the stats were pretty staggering. I thought they were bad, and we had a legal team actually do the research. And in this book, we talk about the statistics of American healthcare. Like, for example, most people, when I say, do you know our healthcare is more expensive than the entire rest of the world combined? Most people don't know that. And when they look at the fact that we're only 4.2% of the world's population and we're more expensive than the rest of the world combined, that's pretty staggering to people. And then when I look at and show them how we rate compared to other countries, like out of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development of the UN, there's 35 countries there. The United States ranks 29th. That's really bad.
Not good for a country that's been, really well established, has lots of funds, and is very focused on trying to change things.
Has the biggest healthcare bill in the world compared to everybody else combined. It's like the analogy I give all the time is like, what if we were all race car drivers and there was 10 people and they all had their own car, and my car cost more than all 10 of those together. And every time we race, I come in 11th place. That would not be good.
Right.
That's where we find ourselves in healthcare. So why is that? Well, the best thing I come up with is our viewpoint. Our viewpoint is let's contain the symptom instead of let's fix the problem. And if you're selling the drugs to contain the symptom, that's a really profitable industry. But if you're in it to help patients, that's not always the way to go.
Right. And when you find, doctors coming together, either on the chiropractic side or on the nurse practitioner or medical doctor side, do you find that most of them are already open and have a different mindset than maybe their colleagues before they join AMI? Or are they kind of on the fence and you're sitting there kind of explaining to them like, listen, this is the viewpoint you have. You seem to be open-minded, but this is the viewpoint you should try to adopt if you want to have this integrated practice?
Well, it goes back to the original statement. I said 80% of all the professions got in it to help people. That's the common ground. So I usually go back to that. And then I say, do you think our healthcare system works? And a lot of times these medical people, I was floored how many people go, no, it's too drug oriented. Like, for example, I ask a lot of medical doctors, you belong to AMA? And the answer I get, which I didn't even understand at first, was, no, that's the drug companies. I'm like, well, no, it's doctors. No, it's the drug companies. And then when I started doing research into it, found out that less than 8% of medical doctors belong. I was like, I didn't know that. And then now my nephew's in medical school, and he says all his professors at the University of Florida are saying, do not join the AMA. That's the drug company. When you look at that, you go, well, the AMA, I thought that was like the presiding body in healthcare, and they are. They own the billing code that even chiropractors use, but it's the drug companies. And you go, that's how this whole monopoly works. So I'm not very popular with people in the drug industry, even though I have some in my immediate family. And I'm not saying we should get rid of the drug industry. What I'm saying is, we need to focus more on function than we do on symptoms. Certainly, there are times when you need to treat symptoms. But if that's your only plan, that's like giving somebody earplugs when they hear a noise in their engine.
Yeah,
it's not going to fix the engine.
Not going to fix the problem. And when you look back at some of the business opportunities, so we talked a lot about the healthcare and treating the patients, but when you go back and look at the business model that exists, when you come out of a hospital system and kind of go into a chiropractic or a private practice kind of model, what kind of pivots do you find that the medical doctors and nurse practitioners or even the chiropractors have to make that kind of a business work?
Good question. So the chiropractors have to respect the fact that those medical professionals have a brain, they have a degree, and they have the ability to make decisions. What they also have to understand is they have very limited understanding of a different plan of attack. The standard of care, which is dictated by the AMA, is usually drug-oriented. I was floored how many medical professionals believe that we're over-medicated and would like to see a different way to do it. But as a chiropractor who's going into this model, you have to recognize you have to create a standard of care to do a less invasive model, and that's what we've done. We have a model that works great. It's based on a lot of resource. Janet Travell, a medical doctor who treated John F. Kennedy with trigger point injections, Renee Callier, a physiatrist in California, Vladimir Yonda, a physiatrist in Czechoslovakia. These are all MDs, and they all had systems of how to get people well, focusing on function as opposed to symptom relief. And we follow a lot of those tenets, explaining that to the medical people and providing training, which we do at AMI, for that, what we see the medical people is when they learn it, they really, really like the fact that we're able to teach them this model. And when they find out it was medical people that created it, the biggest thing I notice with medical people is they're concerned that they don't want to jeopardize their license by doing something crazy. And if you show them valid research and valid things that work, and they realize it's very safe at the same time, they usually come out the other end going, man, this is the best decision I ever made. It's actually easier to hire a nurse practitioner than it is to hire a chiropractor.
Right. And if you look at your guys' program as a whole, the whole system top to bottom, how long does that typically take providers to come together and implement that whole system to switch over from a focused practice in what they're doing right now, either a chiropractor or a nurse practitioner or a medical doctor, whatever it is, coming together? How long does that take them to go through the whole kind of process?
Well, that's like asking a mom how long does it take a kid to learn how to walk. It depends on the kid. So there's our agreement with our clients is 2 years, because we figure that 90% of the people are going to get it within 2 years. What we see is a large percentage, more than half, get it in less than a year. So it depends on what they're trying to do. Our focus is not only to help our clients bring in these other services to their practice, it's also to help them increase their practice. And if they can get that completely worked out, which we're very much in favor of, to get them to open other practices. So a lot of our clients start off with one practice and went to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or I just talked to one who's now at 6 practices, putting the model in place, because once you get it down to that system, it's a matter of duplicating those systems.
And when they are going through this process of learning from you guys how to do an integrated practice, what does that look like? Is it online? Is it in person? Like, give kind of the listeners and the viewers background on what that looks like for them if they were interested in maybe transitioning their practice.
Right. Well, the first thing we say is don't change anything, because if you have an enterprise going now that's paying the bills, we don't want to disrupt that apple cart. But what we do is we help them create our model right next to them in their practice. And as that grows, what most of our clients do is exactly what happened to me. As it grows, I realize, you know what? I don't need the old chiropractic tax ID, because everybody's getting chiropractic in this new model. We walk them through it. We do it in all the things you mentioned. We do online. We do in person. We do coach instruction. So when somebody signs on with us, we do a minimum of 50 different trainings a year. They're usually entitled to go to all of those as part of their agreement, not extra. Most people don't, because they're all over the country. Most people go to like 4 or 5 of them, more. But we do have people that go to 20 of them. We also have a coach that gets assigned to the client, and they call them. They establish a call cycle, whether it's once every 2 weeks or sometimes if needed more. They'll go on the phone with our clients. And what we did was, when my wife and I perfected this system, we created a checklist of what has to be done to get a practice up and running. So that's what the coach is doing. They're calling and going down that list and making sure everything's done. So walking our clients through the process. Then at the trainings, a lot of times my wife, myself, we have very key people who have been working with us for decades in some cases, teaching the systems to our clients. So all of that, plus we have hundreds, probably maybe thousands of videos on our website and on our YouTube channel.
And once they've gone through these checklists of how to run the new style of business that they otherwise weren't informed about before, how do they take that and turn that into a marketing and business opportunity, right? Because people have to know about who you are to be able to utilize your service. Even if you have the best service out there and nobody knows what you do, it doesn't really matter. So how do you guys address that piece?
Right. So remember, my background's in marketing, so I know a little bit about it. I know that you can't do one type of marketing and expect it to work forever, because people become numb to your message. So it's approaching it different ways. We do marketing where we're doing business to business, face to face. We do marketing on social media, because if you're not doing social media today, you're out in the cold. But there's a lot of different types of social media. So we vary it. We vary the way the marketing looks. One of the things we found very successful is marketing the condition instead of marketing your services. Because if you take 10 people out of the public and ask them what's important, this business's services or your condition, every one of them is going to say my condition.
Right.
So marketing from the viewpoint of the patient is a very, very important thing. There are traps in marketing in healthcare. So for example, if you use the wrong terminology in regenerative medicine, different states have different rules. The FDA has their own rules. And although the FDA cannot regulate a human tissue cell transfer, which is what we're doing, they can regulate marketing and promises. So you have to be able to speak the language according to the rules. That's some of the trainings that we do. How to market. We teach our 12-week perpetual marketing plans, which my wife called it. And it's what we put on our books. We're always 3 months in advance of all the marketing opportunities we have, because, in this model, it's a new patient game. It's great to have maintenance patients, and it's important to have maintenance patients, but if you're trying to stop a surgery, that's how you can average your collections being between $300 and $500 a visit. But that patient is not going to want to be running up a bill of $300 to $500 a visit for a maintenance plan, and nor should they. And the doctor should not be billing that to an insurance company because it's maintenance.
Right. So, and that's a sliver too, right? That point in time where you have somebody who's considering surgery that could be a good fit for your guys' model. There's a period of time that they're going to be a great fit for. And then after they get the surgery, now you've kind of tipped that. So what do you guys do to be able to capture that patient at the right time? Is that pre-education when they're a patient in the past, or is it outreaching those people and saying, hey, listen, you have an alternative?
We are outreaching those people. I mean, yeah, we do educate our patients when they come in, because the word doctor literally means teacher, right?